The forest stretched endlessly under a green sky, the strange light of the twin suns casting long shadows between the thick trunks of the alien trees. Saralia moved carefully through the dense undergrowth, her four limbs making no sound against the soft, moss-covered ground. The Varanth had trained her to be precise, to observe without emotion, to judge without interference. Humans were weak creatures, she had always believed, fragile and chaotic, unable to endure the trials of survival. She crouched behind a tall tree and watched. Ahead, a small group of humans were struggling through the forest, their uniforms torn and their movements slow. Saralia had seen their kind before, of course, on the border patrols. On the distant planets, the Varanth had marked as dangerous. But today, something was different. She observed closely, noting the careful way they moved around the injured and the cautious steps they took near traps and hazards. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed through the forest. One of the humans, a man taller than the others, leapt to the side, narrowly avoiding a falling branch. Saralia's eyes followed him closely. Commander Rylan Ward, she noted silently, the one who seemed to lead the others. Unlike the rest, he was calm, his eyes scanning the environment with focus. Even when danger approached, he did not panic. A low hum of machinery announced the arrival of a Varanth patrol nearby. Saralia's instincts screamed at her to report the humans immediately. Protocol demanded it, but as she moved to step out of her hiding place, she saw something that made her pause. The humans were not fleeing. They were protecting each other. One of them, a young boy, had fallen, a deep gash on his leg. Rylan knelt beside him, his hands steady as he tried to stop the bleeding. His face was pale, but his eyes burned with determination. Saralia had never seen this before. The Varanth viewed injury as a weakness, something that should lead to surrender or death. But Rylan did not give up. He fought against pain to help another. Saralia felt a strange pull in her chest, a feeling she did not understand. Her eyes, usually cold and precise, softened slightly. She blinked rapidly, trying to shake off the sensation. The Varanth patrol moved closer. Saralia's training demanded she alert them, but something held her back. She stayed hidden, watching the humans from the shadows. Then, an explosion tore through the forest ahead, sending a plume of smoke and debris into the air. Rylan was caught in the blast. Thrown to the ground, he cried out, clutching his side. Blood soaked his uniform, and for a moment, Saralia felt a jolt of fear. Fear for him, not for herself. She moved closer, her instincts telling her to investigate. The closer she came, the more she saw the extent of his injuries. His breathing was shallow, his hand trembling as he tried to stem the bleeding. Saralia knelt beside him, her eyes locked on the wound. She should have felt nothing, should have simply reported him. But instead, she found herself studying the way he endured the pain. His jaw clenched, his hands worked despite the tremors, and his eyes, even in agony, refused to close in surrender. Something changed in her at that moment. Her eyes, usually sharp and judgmental, softened completely. She could not explain it. Why should the sight of a human's suffering move her? She had seen countless creatures injured in battle, yet none had caused this reaction. She felt an unfamiliar urge to help, to do something beyond observation. Rylan groaned, struggling to sit up. He looked around and saw her shadow moving closer. His hand went to his side instinctively, ready to fight. "Stay back," he warned, his voice weak but firm. Saralia froze. She wanted to speak, to assure him she meant no harm, but the Varanth had no words for comfort in these situations. She only extended her hand slightly, a small gesture of truce. Rylan's eyes narrowed, searching her face, trying to decide if she was friend or foe. The explosion had drawn the attention of nearby Varanth soldiers. Saralia knew they would arrive soon. She had a choice: report the human, follow protocol, or stay and risk everything to observe him further. She chose the latter. Carefully, She guided him to a safer spot behind a thick cluster of trees. He resisted at first, trying to push her away, but when he saw the determined expression in her eyes, he let her help. Ryland's breathing was labored. Every movement caused him pain, yet he did not give up. Saralia watched, fascinated by his resilience. Humans were strange creatures, weak, yet strong, fragile, yet unyielding. She could not understand it fully, but she could feel it. It was unlike anything she had ever experienced among the Varanth. As night began to fall, the forest transformed. Strange bioluminescent plants glowed faintly, casting eerie lights across the terrain. Saralia helped Ryland find a secure place to rest. She built a small barrier from branches and leaves, enough to shield him from predators. He looked at her, eyes filled with suspicion and pain. "Why are you helping me?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Saralia did not answer. She had no words for such a question. Instead, she simply gestured for him to lie down. He did, his body trembling from exhaustion. She sat nearby, keeping watch. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. She had never defied orders before. She had never felt pity or concern or curiosity that ran so deep it made her hesitate in the face of duty. Hours passed. Ryland's breathing slowed as sleep took him, though the wound continued to bleed slowly. Saralia monitored him, fascinated by his body's endurance. Unlike the Varanth, humans seemed to heal in strange ways, using willpower as much as biology to survive. She wondered if that was why he had not screamed, why he had not given up, even when the explosion had thrown him violently to the ground. Suddenly, distant sounds alerted her. A small patrol was moving through the forest. She tensed, ready to act. Ryland stirred in his sleep, groaning softly. She looked at him, feeling an unfamiliar protective instinct. Without hesitation, she moved silently, intercepting the patrol. Using her speed and agility, she created a distraction, leading them away from Ryland's hiding spot. When the patrol moved on, she returned. Ryland was still resting, unaware of the danger he had narrowly avoided. Saralia knelt beside him, her eyes studying his wound again. She touched the edge of the bloodied cloth, not to heal, but to assess the severity. Her hands, so trained to fight and kill, felt clumsy in this task. She realized that her interest in the human was no longer just curiosity. She cared, something the Varanth considered illogical and dangerous. The twin suns began to rise again, casting golden light through the trees. Ryland stirred, opening his eyes. He looked at Saralia, and for a brief moment, the suspicion in his gaze softened. "Who are you?" he asked weakly. She did not answer directly. Instead, she simply pointed to the path ahead, indicating he needed to keep moving to survive. He nodded slowly, trusting her guidance, though he did not know why. Saralia had learned to move without words, to communicate without speech. With humans, gestures and actions often carried more meaning than words. The day progressed, and they moved carefully through the forest. Ryland leaned on Saralia at times, his strength waning. But his determination never faltered. She marveled at this resolve, at the way humans faced danger and pain without surrendering. Every step they took together, every time he pushed himself despite the wound, her respect for him grew. It was a feeling that frightened her, for she did not understand it fully. By nightfall, they found a small clearing with a freshwater stream. Ryland collapsed beside it, exhausted, his breathing shallow. Saralia knelt to help him drink, guiding the water to his lips. He drank slowly, watching her with cautious eyes. You didn't have to help me," he said, his voice barely audible. Saralia simply shook her head. In her own way, she understood the truth of her actions. She did not know why she helped him, only that she could not leave him to die. Her eyes, once cold and unfeeling, now reflected a concern she could not explain. That night, as Rylan slept again, Seralia remained awake. She gazed at the stars, wondering how a human could survive so much and still hold on to hope. For the first time, she questioned everything the Varanth had taught her. Weak, chaotic, fragile. She had seen the truth. Humans were unlike anything her race had ever known. The first part of their journey had ended, but Seralia knew that more dangers awaited. Yet as she watched the human's chest rise and fall in quiet sleep, she realized something else. In his wound, in his courage, in his resilience, something had changed inside her. Something she could not name, but something powerful enough to alter the course of her life forever. And for the first time in her existence, Seralia wondered if humans might not only survive, but if they might even teach her a strength she had never known. The sun rose slowly over the alien forest, bathing the trees in soft golden light. Rylan stirred, feeling the pain in his side sharper than before. He tried to sit up, wincing, but Seralia was already at his side, her hands guiding him gently to stay still. "Easy," she said in her own way, using gestures and soft tones. She had learned that humans often needed words, even if she did not fully understand them, and she tried to imitate them as best as she could. Rylan took a deep breath, staring at the alien beside him. He still did not fully trust her, though he had begun to rely on her presence. Her body language, her careful movements, and the strange softness in her eyes were unlike any Varanth he had ever faced. He had been trained to fight his species' enemies without hesitation, yet now he felt something unfamiliar, hope, fragile but persistent. They continued moving slowly through the forest. Rylan leaned on Seralia when the pain became unbearable. At first, she had been hesitant, unsure how to respond to his dependence. But as the hours passed, she grew accustomed to his trust. She guided him around obstacles, helped him climb over fallen logs, and blocked dangerous creatures from approaching. Each action she took revealed to her a new layer of human resilience, a determination that seemed to grow stronger despite every wound and every hardship. At midday, they came across a small stream. Rylan collapsed beside it, his face pale and strained. Seralia knelt, helping him drink. The cool water soothed him slightly. But his wound throbbed with pain. He looked up at her, confused. Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice weak. Seralia paused. She had no answer in words, only in actions. She pointed to him, then to herself, then back to the forest, trying to explain that survival was possible if they worked together. Rylan frowned, but he understood. He nodded slowly, accepting her guidance. As the day continued, they encountered more dangers. The forest was alive with predators, creatures with sharp claws and glowing eyes. Seralia acted instinctively, keeping the creatures away from Rylan, even risking exposure to her own species' patrols. Each time she protected him, she felt a strange warmth in her chest, a sensation unfamiliar and powerful. She began to realize that this human's courage was affecting her, challenging everything she had been taught. By evening, exhaustion weighed heavily on them both. Rylan's wound had worsened. The bleeding had slowed, but his body shivered with fatigue. Seralia scanned the area and spotted a small cave hidden among thick vines. She guided him inside, clearing debris and making a space for him to rest. He collapsed onto the soft ground, leaning back against the cool rock. For a long time they remained silent. Rylan studied her carefully, noticing the unusual tension in her posture. She was calm, precise, and deliberate, yet there was something in her eyes that betrayed emotion, curiosity, concern, and even a hint of admiration. He had never seen a Varanth behave this way. Most of them were rigid, cold, and ruthless, but she had saved him. She had risked her life. And somehow, she was learning adapting. Night fell, and the cave grew dark. Rylan struggled to find comfort despite the pain. Seralia remained alert, watching over him, her eyes scanning the shadows outside for threats. The strange forest noises filled the silence, creatures moving unseen, insects buzzing softly in the cool night air. Rylan shivered, and she instinctively moved closer, offering warmth without thought, a gesture of protection that confused her as much as it reassured him. "Your people, do they always fight like this?" he asked quietly, referring to the Varanth. Seralia hesitated. She had never questioned her people's methods before. To the Varanth, humans were weak, fragile, and illogical. Yet here was one human, wounded and exhausted, still fighting to survive. She gestured with her hands to indicate strength, endurance, and determination. Rylan nodded, understanding in his own way. The next morning, they continued their journey. Seralia had begun to anticipate Rylan's needs, carrying him when the terrain was too difficult, guiding him past hazards before he even noticed them. She watched as he endured pain, refusing to surrender. Every time he pushed forward, she felt a stirring of admiration. Humans, she realized, drew strength not only from their bodies, but from their hearts. At midday, they came across a clearing where the ground had been disturbed recently. Broken branches and scorched earth suggested a recent skirmish. Rylan winced as he stepped over debris, his wound stinging. Seralia noticed immediately, moving to support him. Her touch was careful, gentle, and deliberate. She realized that her concern for this human had grown beyond simple curiosity. She wanted to see him survive, to see him continue despite the pain. Suddenly, movement in the distance caught her attention. A group of Varanth soldiers was patrolling the area, scanning for intruders. Seralia's instincts screamed at her to hide, to protect Rylan without revealing herself. She pushed him behind a fallen tree and signaled him to remain still. The soldiers passed nearby, their senses sharp but not infallible. Seralia's careful movements and deep knowledge of the forest allowed them to go unnoticed. After the patrol moved on, Rylan breathed heavily. "You saved me again," he said, his voice a mix of relief and exhaustion. Seralia only gestured for him to continue moving. Words were insufficient to explain her feelings. She did not fully understand why she helped him, only that she could not abandon him. Each step they took together reinforced a bond neither of them could yet name. As they moved deeper into the forest, the terrain became more treacherous. Thick vines and uneven ground slowed their progress. Rylan struggled, and Seralia supported him, carrying him short distances when his strength failed. Along the way, she observed his reactions to pain, his determination to push forward, and his calm focus despite injuries. Humans, she realized, possessed a resilience that was both baffling and inspiring. At night, they set up a small camp in a hidden grove. Rylan rested against a tree while Seralia kept watch. She reflected on her training, her mission, and her loyalty to her people. All of it felt different now. Humans were not weak. They endured, they fought, and they protected each other in ways the Varanth could not comprehend. Her beliefs, once rigid, were beginning to shift. During the night, Rylan murmured in his sleep, pain evident even in dreams. Seralia leaned closer, instinctively placing a hand near his shoulder, as if to ease the suffering. She pulled back immediately, realizing she had acted without thought. The feeling of wanting to protect him, to care for him beyond strategy or logic, confused her. She had never felt such a connection before. Morning came, and they resumed their journey. Rylan's strength had not fully returned, but his determination remained. Seralia continued to guide him, moving with precision and patience. As they walked, she began to notice small details, the way he observed the environment, the subtle calculations he made to avoid danger, the way he encouraged himself silently when the pain was unbearable. Humans, she concluded, possessed a quiet, relentless courage that even the Varanth could not replicate. By mid-afternoon, they reached a steep ridge overlooking a valley. Rylan paused, leaning heavily on Seralia for support. From this vantage point, they could see the path ahead, winding through the forest toward human territory. Relief washed over him, but he did not speak. Instead, he looked at her, a mixture of gratitude and wariness in his eyes. Seralia studied him as well. Her eyes, once emotionless and calculating, now reflected something deeper: respect, fascination, and perhaps the beginnings of trust. She realized that her mission, her purpose, and her understanding of the world had all changed in the days she had spent with this human. He had survived wounds that would have killed many others, not just because of his body, but because of his spirit. As they began the descent into the valley, danger struck again. A pack of alien predators emerged from the undergrowth, eyes glowing, teeth bared. Rylan tried to defend himself, but his wound slowed him. Seralia acted without hesitation, using her speed and strength to drive the creatures back. She shielded him, struck with precision, and forced the predators to retreat. When the danger passed, she turned to him, her chest heaving, her eyes still fixed on his face. Rylan stared at her, a mix of astonishment and gratitude. I don't know how to thank you," he said, his voice strained. Seralia only nodded, unsure how to reply. Words were unnecessary. Actions had already conveyed her commitment. She would protect him, guide him, and ensure he survived, even if it meant defying everything she had known. As night fell again, they found a hidden grove to rest. Rylan lay down, exhausted but alive. Seralia sat nearby, keeping watch. She reflected on everything she had seen in the past 2 days, the pain he had endured, the courage he had shown, and the quiet determination that had never faltered. Humans were extraordinary. They were fragile in appearance, but their hearts made them stronger than any predator. Stronger than fear. Stronger than even the cold logic of her own people. She realized, for the first time, that her life had changed because of this human. The wound he carried was more than a physical injury. It was a symbol of resilience, courage, and the strength that came from the heart. And as she watched him sleep, she knew that their journey was far from over. There would be more dangers, more choices, and more lessons to learn. But she was no longer just an observer. She had chosen a path that would define her, a path intertwined with a human whose courage had opened her eyes to a world she had never understood. And for the first time, she embraced the possibility that humans were not merely survivors. They were teachers of strength, endurance, and hope. The forest grew thicker as Seralia and Rylan continued their journey. Every step was a struggle for him. The wound in his side still burned with sharp pain. Yet he moved forward, leaning on her when he could, stumbling when he could not. Seralia kept a steady pace, adjusting her movements to match his limits, watching closely for any sign of danger. Every shadow, every rustle of leaves set her senses on alert. She had learned to anticipate threats, but now her focus was divided. She watched not only for predators or enemy patrols, but also for the human beside her, whose persistence fascinated her more with every moment. They came to a river, the water clear but swift. Rylan froze, his leg trembling. I can't cross that," he whispered, gripping a branch for balance. Seralia knelt beside him, pointing to a fallen tree that spanned the river a short distance downstream. She gestured with patience, showing him the safe path. He hesitated, then took a deep breath and stepped carefully onto the tree trunk. Seralia moved beside him, steadying him when his foot slipped. Every step tested his strength, but he made it across, unbroken, though his face was pale and sweat coated his forehead. For the first time, Seralia allowed herself to speak softly. are stronger than you seem," she said, her tone awkward, foreign even to her own ears. Rylan looked at her, surprised. His lips parted as if to speak, but he only nodded. Trust was growing slowly between them, though both knew it was fragile. The terrain became rougher as they ascended a hill. Jagged rocks and loose soil made movement difficult. Rylan groaned with each step, clutching his side, but he refused to stop. Saralia noticed the determination in his eyes, the way he refused to surrender to weakness. Humans, she realized, measured strength differently from the Varanth. Endurance was not only physical, it came from heart, mind, and spirit combined. She found herself admiring this resilience in silence, even as the Varanth training within her protested. By mid-afternoon, they reached a plateau that overlooked a wide valley. The valley below was thick with mist, concealing the path that led toward human settlements. Rylan collapsed to his knees, leaning on a rock. Blood seeped through his uniform, and exhaustion weighed heavily on him. Saralia knelt beside him, inspecting the wound once again. She could see that the damage had worsened, yet he did not whimper or cry. He simply breathed deeply and pressed forward, waiting for her guidance. "You don't quit," she said finally, in her clumsy imitation of human speech. Rylan managed a weak smile. "Quitting isn't an option," he said, struggling to his feet. His voice was weak but firm. They moved slowly down into the misty valley, the air damp and cool against their skin. Strange, bioluminescent plants glowed faintly along the path, illuminating the way in an ethereal light. Saralia kept close to Rylan, noticing every wince, every step of discomfort. She had grown protective, though she did not fully understand why. The bond between them was growing, subtle but undeniable. It was not friendship in the way humans described, nor loyalty in the way the Varanth valued it. It was something different, an unspoken connection formed in the heat of survival and danger. As evening approached, they heard movement ahead. Human voices carried faintly on the wind, distant but unmistakable. Rylan's eyes brightened slightly, hope flickering across his features. "Humans," he whispered. "They're close." Saralia felt a pang of unease. Their path was not yet safe. Even if they reached human territory, Varanth patrols could intercept them at any moment. She positioned herself in front of Rylan, scanning the shadows with sharp eyes. When the human voices grew louder, they revealed themselves. 2 scouts, searching the forest for survivors. Rylan stepped forward, calling out, his voice weak but clear. The scouts froze, their weapons at the ready, until they recognized him. Relief washed over their faces and they ran to support him. Saralia stepped back, observing quietly. She had saved him from danger countless times, guided him through treacherous terrain, yet now the humans would take over. A strange feeling settled in her chest. She had risked everything to protect him, and now, at the end of the journey, she felt both satisfaction and loss. The scouts noticed her standing alone. "Who are you?" one asked, lowering his weapon slightly. Rylan glanced at her, then spoke. "She helped me, kept me alive. She saved my life." His voice carried gratitude, respect, and something else, trust. Saralia's eyes softened as she listened. She did not expect recognition nor praise. She had acted out of instinct, out of a strange curiosity and concern that had grown stronger each day. Hearing it acknowledged by a human unsettled her more than she expected. Night fell, and the human scouts guided Rylan and Saralia to a hidden camp. Medics tended to his wound, cleaning it carefully and bandaging it properly. Rylan winced at the pain but remained composed. Saralia watched, fascinated. The humans were methodical, precise, and efficient. They treated injury as a challenge to overcome, not a reason to surrender. It was similar to Varanth training, but infused with emotion and care. When the medics finished, Rylan turned to Seralia. "I don't know how to thank you," he said softly. She simply nodded, unsure how to respond. Words were inadequate. Actions had already conveyed her commitment, her loyalty, and her care. In the days that followed, Rylan recovered slowly. Seralia remained nearby, observing the humans closely. She learned from them, watched how they healed, how they planned, and how they relied on each other. Every action taught her something new. Humans were unpredictable, yes, but in their unpredictability, there was brilliance. They could adapt, endure, and fight against overwhelming odds. One evening, Rylan and Seralia sat by a small fire, the glow reflecting off their faces. He had grown stronger, though not yet fully healed. She watched him carefully, noting the scar beginning to form on his side, a mark of survival. He noticed her gaze and tilted his head slightly, curious. "You changed," he said simply. Seralia blinked. "Changed," she repeated, unsure of his meaning. "You look different," he explained slowly. "You're not like the others. You care. You think. You understand." Her eyes softened, and for a moment she felt something strange, gratitude perhaps, or a connection she could not name. Humans, she realized, had the ability to awaken emotions in others, to inspire courage and understanding where none had existed before. She had always believed that strength was measured in battle, in skill, in obedience. But Rylan's survival, his heart, and his will to endure had shown her another kind of strength, one she had never known. The night passed quietly, but the forest was alive with danger. Varanth patrols moved unseen, searching for any humans who had escaped their grasp. Seralia remained vigilant, scanning the shadows, listening to the subtle sounds of movement. She would not allow them to reach Rylan, not after everything he had endured. The following morning they began moving again, heading toward a human settlement. Rylan's strength had returned, but Seralia kept a careful watch. She guided him through difficult terrain, avoided natural hazards, and intervened whenever a predator approached. Each action reinforced the bond between them. Trust had grown from necessity, but now it was genuine. They depended on each other, not merely for survival, but for reassurance and companionship. Along the way, they encountered signs of recent conflict, burned-out camps, broken weapons, and the remnants of skirmishes. Rylan's expression hardened, determination evident in every movement. Seralia observed silently. Humans endured not only physical pain but also loss and fear, yet they continued to move forward. Their resilience was extraordinary. At midday, they reached a ridge overlooking the human settlement. Smoke rose in thin columns, and distant voices carried through the valley. Rylan paused, breathing deeply. "We made it," he said, exhaustion and relief mingling in his voice. Seralia felt a strange pull in her chest. She had guided him here, protected him, and watched him endure pain beyond what she had thought possible. Her eyes reflected a new understanding, a recognition of human courage, determination, and the ability to inspire change in even the most rigid beings. As they descended toward the settlement, they were spotted by guards. Rylan called out, identifying himself and Seralia as allies. The guards hesitated, wary of the alien beside him, but Rylan's words, his trust, and his presence reassured them. Seralia remained slightly behind, observing the humans' reactions. She had acted as an outsider, a protector, and a student of their resilience. Once inside the settlement, Rylan was immediately tended to by medics. His wound healed steadily, though the scar remained as a permanent reminder of the ordeal. Seralia watched silently, fascinated by the human skill, precision, and care. She had seen warriors before, but none like these. Strength, endurance, courage, and compassion intertwined in ways the Varanth could not understand. That night, Rylan rested, finally safe. Saralia remained outside the human quarters, her gaze fixed on the stars. She reflected on everything she had witnessed, the pain he had endured, the determination he had shown, and the unspoken bond that had formed between them. Humans were extraordinary, not because they were physically strong, but because they chose to endure, to protect, and to fight with heart and mind united. Saralia realized something profound. The wound he carried, the injury she had witnessed, had done more than challenge his body. It had revealed the essence of humanity to her. It had opened her eyes to a strength that was not measured in skill or obedience, but in courage, loyalty, and the will to endure against impossible odds. And as she watched the humans she had saved, she knew that their journey was far from over. More challenges awaited, more choices to make, and more lessons to learn. Yet she embraced it all, for she had discovered that humans were not merely survivors. They were teachers of strength, resilience, and hope. The human settlement was alive with quiet activity as the morning sun spread its light across the camp. Rylan had rested through the night, his breathing steady, the wound on his side now cleaned and properly bandaged by the medics. He sat outside, watching the humans around him, taking in their organization, their care for one another, and the quiet strength that radiated from every movement. Saralia remained close, alert, and attentive, her gaze sweeping the perimeter for threats. Though the humans trusted her, she knew the forest still held dangers, and the Varanth were relentless. Rylan turned to her, noticing the tension in her posture. "You've been with me the whole time," he said softly. "Why? Why did you risk yourself so many times?" Saralia did not answer immediately. Words were difficult. She had learned to act rather than speak. Instead, she gestured to his wound, to the battles they had faced, and then to him. She tried to convey that she had learned something from him, something important. Rylan studied her, slowly understanding. He nodded. "You saw what humans can endure," he said. "And it changed you." Saralia's eyes softened, a faint glimmer of emotion reflecting the truth of her experience. She had been trained to view humans as weak, as chaotic, as incapable of true strength. But she had seen something different. Pain did not break them. Fear did not stop them. And injury, even a wound as severe as Rylan's, could reveal a strength that surpassed her own expectations. As they spoke, a scout ran up from the edge of the camp. "Rylan! There's movement in the valley! Variant patrols are approaching!" The human commander stood quickly, though his movements were careful, mindful of his injury. Saralia's senses immediately heightened. She rose alongside him, her body ready, her mind calculating every possible approach to the incoming threat. The Varanth had been tracking them. Despite their efforts to avoid detection, the patrols had found the human settlement. Saralia knew confrontation was inevitable. She positioned herself between the humans and the approaching threat, her presence both a shield and a warning. Rylan noticed her stance, her unwavering focus, and felt a surge of gratitude and respect. She had grown from a distant observer into an essential protector, her loyalty proven through countless dangers. The first patrol emerged from the mist. Their movements were precise, deliberate, the cold logic of the Varanth evident in every step. They expected fear, resistance, and submission. Instead, they encountered humans who stood ready, injured but determined, and an alien who had defied her own kind to protect them. Saralia's presence unsettled the Varanth. They had never encountered one of their own acting against them out of concern for another species. Rylan signaled to the human soldiers, and they moved into position, forming a defensive line. The Varanth paused, calculating, but Saralia did not wait. She struck first, using her speed and agility to disrupt their formation. Her strikes were precise, targeting limbs and weapons, not killing but disabling. The humans followed her lead, inspired by her courage and coordinated by Ryland's commands. The Varanth were powerful, but the humans fought with determination, protecting one another and refusing to yield. Amid the chaos, Ryland noticed his wound throbbing sharply, pain shooting through his side with every movement. He grimaced but continued to fight, using both strategy and sheer willpower to lead his forces. Seralia stayed close, intercepting attacks, defending him when possible. Each time she acted, her eyes caught his briefly, and she saw the same admiration and gratitude reflected back. Their bond had deepened beyond survival. It was now a partnership forged in courage, trust, and mutual respect. The battle raged through the valley, the sounds of combat echoing across the terrain. Seralia marveled at the humans' resilience. Despite their injuries and fatigue, they did not falter. Each strike was purposeful, each maneuver calculated, yet their actions carried something the Varanth lacked: heart. The human will to survive, to protect, and to endure drove them forward in ways that logic alone could not predict. Ryland noticed the Varanth faltering in their approach. They had anticipated easy victory, but instead faced a force of humans who refused to surrender and an alien who had turned her loyalty against them. He realized that the wound he carried, the injury that had caused so much pain, had also become a symbol of something greater. It had shown Seralia the strength of humanity, the courage that lay beneath the surface, and had inspired her to act against her own kind. As the battle reached its peak, a larger Varanth force emerged from the trees, aiming to overwhelm the humans. Seralia and Ryland exchanged a glance, unspoken understanding passing between them. They would fight, not for conquest or obedience, but for survival, for life, for the future. Ryland adjusted his stance, preparing for the final clash, while Seralia positioned herself to intercept the elite soldiers. The clash was intense. Seralia moved with precision, blocking strikes and countering attacks with agility and skill. Ryland led the humans with strategy, guiding them to exploit weaknesses and protect the wounded. Despite his injury, he remained composed, his determination driving both himself and those around him. The Varanth, though powerful, struggled to adapt to the unpredictability of human courage, combined with Seralia's skill and insight. During a brief pause in the battle, Ryland found himself facing a Varanth commander, a towering figure with sharp, calculating eyes. The commander lunged, but Ryland anticipated the move, sidestepping and striking strategically to disable the enemy. Seralia intervened, her movements fluid, her strikes precise. Together, they created an unexpected synergy, human determination paired with alien skill. The fight continued until the Varanth realized they could not succeed. Their forces retreated, regrouping, but the humans held the valley. The settlement had been defended, lives had been saved, and the courage of one wounded human and one alien who had defied her own kind had turned the tide. Ryland's chest heaved, exhaustion evident in every movement. Seralia stood beside him, her eyes scanning the battlefield, ensuring no threats remained. She felt a strange sense of satisfaction, one she had never experienced before. Humans had taught her something fundamental, that strength was not merely skill or power, but the willingness to endure, to fight for others, and to persevere against impossible odds. After the battle, medics tended to the wounded, and Ryland's injury was carefully treated again. He looked down at the scar forming on his side, a permanent reminder of the ordeal he had endured. Seralia observed silently, understanding that the wound was more than a mark of pain. It was a symbol of survival, courage, and the lessons he had imparted through his endurance. As night fell, the settlement settled into quiet activity. Fires burned softly, casting warm light across the camp. Humans moved with purpose, tending to the wounded, repairing structures, and ensuring safety. Rylan sat quietly, reflecting on the journey that had brought him here, from the moment of his injury to the challenges they had faced together. Seralia remained near him, her eyes fixed on his face. She had seen him endure pain, face danger, and act with courage beyond what she had imagined possible. She had witnessed humanity at its finest, not just in survival, but in determination, loyalty, and compassion. Her own understanding of strength, loyalty, and courage had shifted completely. Rylan noticed her gaze and smiled faintly. "You've changed too," he said. "You see things differently now. You've learned what humans are capable of." Seralia inclined her head, acknowledging the truth in his words. She had learned that strength could come from heart as much as from skill, that courage could manifest even in the weakest of bodies, and that loyalty and compassion could inspire actions beyond reason. Humans had taught her these lessons, and she had acted upon them, defying her own kind to protect the one who had inspired change in her. The following days were quiet but filled with preparation. Seralia stayed with the humans, observing and learning. She discovered that humans healed not only physically, but also emotionally, drawing strength from each other and from shared purpose. She watched Rylan train again, his movements cautious but determined, a symbol of resilience to all who followed him. The Varanth did not return immediately, but the threat remained. Seralia and Rylan discussed strategies quietly, planning defenses and ensuring the settlement's safety. Their partnership had grown beyond necessity. It had become a bond of trust, respect, and understanding. The wound that had once seemed a weakness now stood as a testament to human strength, a reminder that survival required heart as well as body. One evening, Rylan and Seralia walked to the edge of the settlement, overlooking the valley below. The stars shimmered in the clear night sky, the twin moons casting a gentle glow over the forest. Rylan looked down at the scar on his side, then at her. "This wound, it didn't just hurt me," he said. "It changed you. It changed everything." Seralia's eyes softened, reflecting the truth of his words. She had been trained to follow orders, to obey, and to judge without emotion. Yet she had learned from a human, from a wounded warrior who refused to give up, that courage, resilience, and heart could reshape understanding, inspire loyalty, and even alter the course of conflict. Rylan extended his hand to her. She hesitated briefly, then took it. In that simple gesture, they acknowledged the journey they had shared, the dangers, the challenges, and the lessons learned. Their bond was unspoken, but undeniable, a testament to endurance, trust, and mutual respect. As they returned to the settlement, Seralia knew that the world had shifted in subtle but profound ways. Humans were no longer merely creatures to observe, judge, or underestimate. They were teachers, warriors, and bearers of strength that could inspire even those who had believed themselves invulnerable. The wound that had once seemed a mark of weakness had revealed the true power of humanity, and in doing so, it had transformed both her understanding and her life forever. Rylan sat beside the fire, the warmth of the flames reflecting in his eyes. Seralia remained close, silent, but watchful. The forest was calm, for now, but both knew that dangers would return. Yet they also knew something far more important. The strength of humans was not in their bodies alone, but in their courage, their loyalty, and their unyielding will to endure. And in that truth, both human and alien had found a path forward, together.